Welcome to Theory Paranormal. This is Pax, your host, with the other host, Dalton. And this is going to be podcast of season number 2, episode 11. And it is going to be on 2 subjects. It's going to be on clairvoyancy and also, can consciousness transcend when somebody passes away and move on and go somewhere else? Or does it stop? So, those are the 2 topics we're going to be discussing on this podcast. For everybody that is returning, we appreciate your patronage and listening to us here at Theory Paranormal. If you are new, welcome. A lot of people always ask me and Dalton, where can we listen to Theory Paranormal? We don't really put it out there too much, but this time I will let everybody know. You can find us on Pandora Music, Spotify Music, on Audible, on Amazon Music. You can also find us on YouTube, Podbean, and a multitudes of other places. The list goes on, but those are some of the major podcast hosting platforms that you can find us. Also, with everything that I just said, the portion of this podcast, the history of consciousness and energy, and does it transcend to other places when somebody passes away, was actually a submission by a listener that wanted to know this particular question. So after me and Dalton discussed it and we looked at our other podcasts of things we've done in the past, we really haven't got into this particular subject that much. So we decided to dedicate half the podcast to it. So we appreciate that information and question. And we hope with our answers, we're able to give you some insight and something to think about. So going forward, I will let you flip the coin per se. Dalton, are we going to be doing the first portion of the podcast on consciousness, or are we going to be doing it on clairvoyance?
Oh, first of all, how you doing today?
Hey, another day. Everything is lovely and great as always. So every day is a holiday, I like to think.
Well, the listener I know personally, her name's Paige. She's over there on the West Coast. And we were chatting one time, and I said, hey, because she was talking about the podcast, and I said, hey, if there's one thing you'd like to know about the paranormal or anything of that nature, what would it be? And she said she would want to know what happens to our conscious after we die. Is there something beyond life? And so I think we can spend something for Paige. I think we'll start with that if you want to, and then we can go into the clairvoyance part.
Okay. Definitely think that this is a fascinating subject. Sometimes maybe controversial, depending on somebody's ideals or value or perception of what they believe is right or wrong, just because it has to do with the afterlife or continuance of energy, metaphorically speaking. So, in just, a quick 15-second spin in your mind, Dalton, what does it mean to continue on with the consciousness after somebody dies?
To be honest with you, man, I really, really never thought about it. Our body's made of energy. We know that basically when you pass, the energy pretty much goes somewhere, I would think. And I would think that your consciousness would go with it. Not that you kind of remember or that but like in the part of the torture days, like say back in like medieval times or wherever, like what was the one guy, I forget his name anyway, but because they say that, when you die, that your brain continues to run, your conscious will run for about 2 to 20 seconds. And one of the things that they used to do back then when they used to basically kind of behead people, one of the cruel things was for them to set the head in front of the body so they can actually see themselves. it was like a cruel thing for them to do, because you can actually, like, your brain, your conscious and all that would keep going for those 2 to 20 seconds. So it was like, I don't know, maybe a shocking thing to see. I wouldn't want to see that, but you talk about, you can talk about all kinds of things with that, I think. I've never really gotten into it though. What would be your take on it? What's your take on consciousness, afterlife?
Well, basically, the word consciousness means a state of being awake and aware of one's surroundings. And I believe, like you said, the energy that's in one's body is there for a reason. And when people pass away or pass on, collectively, that energy goes somewhere. And the consciousness, I would even say, continues on, but it is no longer tethered or tied to one's physical extremities and body. So it is transcended into a different realm, area, dimension, whatever you want to call it. And it continues on. What's kind of interesting is that basically the study of the consciousness has led to over a millennia of analysis and explanations and debates among philosophers and scientists, theologians, and nobody can tack it down and say, this is definitively where it is in the brain or what it is, as far as defining it. Dictionaries, yes, a lot of definitions of it, but to definitively say this is how and why, no, not at all. That's my quick
Well, I
little
believe
2-second blurb on that.
so. There is different beliefs about what happens to our conscious when we die. According to Hammeroff, the human brain is the perfect quantum computer, and the soul or consciousness is simply information stored at the quantum level. And it can be transferred following the death of the body, where he's saying is quantum information carried by consciousness merges with our universe and exists infinitely. So basically infinite. But religion tells us that our souls live on eternally. Now, it's funny that that's included in that when we talk about, when we talked in past podcasts about religion, and they got this one belief of heaven and hell. You're going to one place, you're going to another. But yet here it says that it tells us our souls live on eternally. So basically, again, they're talking about ghosts. But even after our breathing and heartbeat stop, we remain conscious for about 2 to 20 seconds. That's what I said. According to Dr. Parnia, this is the thinking and decision making part of the brain responsible for deciphering the information gathered from our senses. Now, according to a lot of different, you want to say a lot of different people, scientists, even a lot of scientists actually, but they've been doing studies and research on the consciousness and what can happen afterwards. So, one part is that we understand death to mean the state that takes hold after our heart stops beating, right? So when you're pretty much gone and the circulation comes to a halt, we don't breathe, our brain shut down, and that's what divides the states we occupy from one moment of being alive to the next of being basically passed away. Though our definition of death hinges on something else, the point past which we're no longer able to return, these two were more or less the same until about 50 years ago when they basically created CPR, which means that you can, today, someone's heart can stop and they can resuscitate you. So modern resuscitation was a game changer for basically emergency care, which we know. But what's fascinating there is that the time after you or I die, that the cells inside our body start to gradually go toward their own process of death. Now, again, this is Dr. Parnia or Parnia, and he's a director of critical care and resuscitation research in the New York University Medical Center. Now, he's not saying that the brain still works or any part of you still works once you've died, but the cells don't instantly switch from alive to dead. Actually, the cells are much more resilient to the heart stopping to the person dying than we used to understand, basically, is what he's saying. So he goes on and he talks about a lot more stuff, but he gets into that they were working on human cadavers from time to time, observe the genes that are active after death. And according to the University of Washington, a professor named Peter Noble, he published an open biology. Him and his colleagues tested mice and zebrafish and found not just that a handful, but a combined total of 1,063 genes that remained active in some cases for up to 4 days after the subject had died. Not did their activity dissipate, it spiked. So it didn't. So when these animals passed, their bodies and stuff didn't downgrade, they spiked.
That makes sense.
So, right. So hence the fact that we keep talking about your body's made of energy and all your brain cells and stuff that's firing off is like an engine block. You got spark plugs, you got wires, you got a distributor, you got ignition coils, and they're constantly firing off sparks. They said we didn't anticipate. They didn't anticipate that, basically. And he said, can you imagine 24 hours after the time of death, you take a sample and the transcripts of the genes are actually increasing in abundance. That was their surprise.
I mean,
what
you're saying, life goes on because logically it's organic. Human, bodies, any body of any animal, everything's organic. It's flesh, it's blood, it's circulatory systems, nervous systems, musculoskeletal systems. There's tons of systems, and the thing is it's all going to be still working, even if a part of it is gone. What was the whole purpose of the consciousness in the brain? Well, it's to make things coordinate, work, and make sense. And, that may have been the main contributing factor to utilize the body. But all these other systems, providing that their functionality is still good, is still like, hey, we're still doing our thing. So I could see why you stated that all of those genes in those different entities were spiking. Maybe they were spiking also because of the fact that they weren't getting the stimuli that they were normally accustomed to. So it was literally maybe a preservation thing. Who knows? I'm not a scientist. I just,
Yeah, we're not scientists and we don't know, but I'm just reading off of this guy's research. And he also has shown that people who survive medical death frequently report experiences that share similar themes: bright lights, benevolent guiding figures, relief from physical pain, deeply felt sensation of peace. Because those experiences are subject, it's possible to chalk them up to hallucinations. Now, here we go with the hallucination thing again. Where the explanation fails is among the patients who have passed on an operating table or crash cart reported watching from a corner of the room or from above as doctors tried to save them.
Yep.
Accounts, which we've talked about that before. I even talked about where some doctors, surgeons will write a message on top of the light.
Yep.
And then when they say, "Oh, you passed and you were hovering above us," what'd that message say on the lamp? And they're like, "What are you talking about?" So subsequently verified by very perplexed doctors themselves. Now, these patients were able to describe objective events that took place while they were dead. We're not exactly sure, but it does seem to suggest that when our brains and bodies die, our consciousness may not, or at least not right away, I guess, come to play, I guess. And maybe it takes a minute after you pass now, but you're kind of talking there. He's talking there like when you pass that your energy. So basically your astral form is what leaves your shell. and they're floating around in the room, and they're able to see what's going on and be able to. And then when they bring them back, they're able to describe what they seen. Which, even if you did the joke above the lamp and wrote a message, how can you explain that person knowing the position of every doctor
Right.
while they're knocked out?
Yeah,
So,
that is pretty interesting.
right, because I even asked the doctor that myself. Unfortunately, it was back when my daughter was in the hospital having some surgery done. I kind of I asked the surgeon how many people have gone away and come back and said, "Oh, I've seen you," and he's like, "Well, we've had that a few times." And I said, "Are you one of the ones that write a message or tape something to the top of the lamp, the surgical lamp, and ask them what they seen?" He's like, "Yeah, my buddy does that." And I said, but how do you explain this person coming back and go, "Well, I seen the nurse rush over there and grab this and bring it back to you, and you did this and that." I mean, this person's passed out on the table. So how do you explain that they know every movement was made? Maybe, maybe they weren't up high enough to see that subliminal message that y'all left up there. Maybe they were just in a spot where they could see it. But how do you explain them knowing every move you made? And his response was, "I never thought about that." I was like, "Of course you haven't. The first thing you asked was, 'Did you see the message above the lamp?' No, I didn't read that." "Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, here we go. We're going to give you this medication." And they go on about talking. But, oh, and here it is under Parnia's deal. He says, how are these patients able to describe objective events that took place while they were passed? We're not exactly sure.
Right.
They're not exactly sure.
Exactly.
Right. Right. And they're not exactly sure why certain parts of us appear to withstand death, even as it takes hold of everything else. But
So
it does seem to suggest that when our brains and bodies pass, our consciousness may not, or at least not right away.
so as far as it goes for ancient philosophical and religious perspectives, this has always been one of the biggest lingering questions since the dawn of man and woman about what happens when you pass away. Spiritual beliefs, basically early burial practices and the development of spiritual animalistic views provided evidence of early reflections of consciousness. The soul and spirit, a lot of cultures and religions have viewed consciousness as connected to the soul or spirit or separate from the physical body. As far as it goes for energy concepts like basically within Chinese medicine and the vital force or prana in some Indian traditions were used to understand the energy underlying life and consciousness. Now, if you wanted to spin this to more modern scientific perspectives, you got neuroscience, you got basically modern science, particularly neuroscience, is focused on understanding consciousness in terms of brain processes. So to take away all the exciting consciousness aspect of energy and soul and dwindle it down to, oh, it's a bunch of neurons and things firing in the brain. That's not exciting or fun. The biggest thing still that is the lingering question is being able to explain the subjective, qualitative aspects of consciousness remains a key focus of research everywhere. So what does that mean? All that really comes down to in a bunch of shiny words is to understand why and how the consciousness exists and what its purpose is. Nothing more, nothing less. And one other thing that I find interesting is this is more of a metaphysical approach. A lot of people, and this will kind of tie in to our next subject we're going to be speaking about momentarily, is there's a connected, shared resource of a higher consciousness, per se, that people are able to dip into depending on the way they're made. And what I mean by made, I mean the way they're made as a person, because as we know, everybody's different. And you may have heard the phrase higher consciousness, or they are more conscious of something, or they were conscious of information that they'd never been taught or told or shown. That's what I'm discussing and talking about. Maybe they're able, by they, meaning that an individual, to go somewhere else and tap into something that you can't taste, touch, see, or feel, but it's there, like the internet per se, and get information and to be able to process it, understand it, and even maybe express it. So, just my quick little 2
Well,
cents on that.
well, you're right in a way because the scientists and I always hate going scientific because they don't really line up. They do and they don't. They want to say they don't, but they actually do line up with the paranormal. They're trying to figure stuff out as fast as we are. It's just to them, it's all scientific. There's nothing paranormal about it. There's nothing religion about it. There's no, higher power. It's just science to them, which I understand it. But you got a bunch of them that were studying NDEs, which is near death experiences, in an attempt to gain insight into how death overcomes the brain. Now, basically, they were saying that remarkable things were happening. And one of them was a surge of electricity entered the brain moments before brain death. Now, when you examine the electrical signals inside, when they were examining the signals inside the heads of rats that they were studying, and they found that the rodents entered a hyper alert state just before death. Now, it makes you wonder, like, again, my opinion, my just outlook on this. So you're passing away. Your body knows it's failing. It's going. And it's saying that a surge of electricity entered the brain moments before brain death, which means when you pass, is that the body's last fight to stay alive? Like the last part of your soul, your energy rushes to because the brain, we all know the brain is pretty much the core of your body, right? It's the one firing off the most electricity. So when the body senses, your brain senses that the body's going, and what is it doing? Sucking all that energy to one power point. Because, like I said, when they used to behead people and they would set the head in front of their body to let them see it as a cruelty thing, and yet you're able to look around and see things not connected to your body because what? Because all that energy, all your electricity, all your neurons or whatever went to your brain. Now your brain is your power plant, right? Which mainly that's what it is anyway. So it keeps everything going for a while. So I mean, is that when they say that moments before brain death or even before death that there's a hyper state of alert and that energy's rushing to your brain, that sounds like your body's last ditch effort to be alive. Like
Yep. Flight or fight, you know?
and I think that's pretty interesting in itself. And then of course when you pass, all that energy is released into the universe.
Yep.
But the thing about it is, I mean, here's the bottom line with all that. I believe your consciousness lives on afterwards, and I think we have proof of that by our investigations, by different spirits telling us, they fought in the Civil War, or they tell us about their family, or where they lived, or they were an iron worker or a miner, depending on what we're investigating, depending on how they passed away. If they're able to answer questions like an intelligent haunt, let's talk about an intelligent haunt. If they're able to answer questions and answer things and tell us, wouldn't that be the consciousness of a person that passed away?
Well, that's the thing. That's where I got to put the brakes because unfortunately, we don't know whatever's communicating with us, what their disposition is, what they are, where they're from, or anything. At that point, we got to take it with a grain of salt and hope for the best, but sometimes expect the worst. And that's how it is being a paranormal investigator. You can go into a place and think you're good to go. You do your due diligence, you do your history check, you do the records, you talk to people, You talk to the owner occupants of the place. Go in.
Yeah, but you're going in the right field right now.
Oh,
It's not what I was saying. I'm saying like you're in an investigation. I don't really. I'm not talking about the homework, the research, or anything like that. What I'm saying is because we're talking about the conscious mind. So yes, I will agree with you to a point in the beginning of what you said, where you said that you don't know what you're talking to. You're exactly right. We could be talking to anybody. You know, it could be anything in the paranormal. It could be an alien. It could be, whatever. But what I'm saying is let's take it back to the consciousness. So if you're talking to an intelligent spirit, one that's communicating, answering your flashlight, answering your K2, and giving you answers, my question is, could that be the consciousness from the person that passed away still running?
I would say maybe. Maybe.
I mean,
So,
I'm not trying to get a definite answer because of course we don't know. We're not dead. Like I honestly can't answer any of this because I'm not dead. If I died for a while and then I said, "Oh yeah, while I was dead, I actually remember what I did after I died," or something like that, that's fine. But I'm saying it's kind of a situation. You know how I am, man. It's like skinwalkers and werewolves. I started tying those two together, like maybe werewolves were skinwalkers. Okay, so here I am with the conscious mind going, well, I have an intelligent ghost or spirit or entity talking to me, and they're telling me about their family, or they're telling me, if I ask them, "Hey, are you a male or a female?" and they ask, they turn the light on that they're a female. Well, they know what they are, right? So then I go to, "Do you have kids?" And the light comes on that they have kids. Okay, do you have one boy or one girl? And they keep answering these questions. I'm just thinking, let me just rephrase that whole thing. I'm thinking that would be the consciousness of a person that passed away. That would be your consciousness after life because you have the energy form of the entity. And then the consciousness that's tied to that energy form is still going because they're able to talk to you and tell you, legitimate questions about themselves or how they passed or where their house is or whatever. Do you get what I'm saying now?
I do. So tell me this. What's your, what do you think the individual that's clairvoyant, what do you think they're able to do?
Oh, you just jumped ship and went right to clairvoyance.
Oh, it'll tie back around. You'll see. Now, if what's clairvoyance mean to
well,
you? Just off the top of your head.
well, clairvoyance could be meaning a couple things. I mean, but basically, it's a person that claims to have the ability to acquire information beyond ordinary perception. I mean, they have like what I would say like the third eye. They have an extrasensory, what do you call it, perception.
So did you just a factoid? Did you know that clairvoyant? It's actually a French word meaning clear seeing, and a lot of people are notable with this word normally because it's affiliated with psychic abilities. So, like you said, what it basically comes down to is a sixth sense, an intuition and insight, or being able to acquire information that is impossible to get through normal sensory methods, seeing, smelling, hearing, touching. They wouldn't normally have that information. Sometimes you might hear people say, you know, hey, watch out. Don't go over there. It's bad energy, or I see your aura. That person potentially can see energy forms or colors or images. Now, what is pretty interesting about clairvoyancy is scientifically, it's not validated. There's no standard ability to be able to say, okay, if you meet this threshold, you're clairvoyant. And as far as it goes in society, it's one of these things where it's like, oh, okay, you can do that. That's cool. Alrighty then, and someone just kind of walks away slowly from the conversation. My whole point is that this is one of those things, more times than not in society and with individuals, that it's an ability that's either there or not. Sure, there's books. You can read about it. You can learn about it. You can get people's perspectives. You get people's insights. You get people's stories, methodologies, experiences. But it's one of these things to where somebody just is or isn't of the ability to do this. For instance, I'm sure you've made the reference of an individual being a prodigy or a savant at something. Like, oh, this person is a prodigy and they can play the piano, like they are a major musician, but they are only 7 years old, So it doesn't make sense that a child that young can have that skill set of somebody that's been playing the instrument for 30 years. That's just how it is, at least from my experience of individuals I've met that have abilities, even clairvoyance with this. So,
we talked about that in reincarnation, man, that, a lot of people, these kids come back at a young age and they're called prodigies. And we said that kind of falls along the lines of reincarnation and somebody actually coming back and remembering some of the skills. Now, which they're not supposed to. They say that when you pass, if you do come back, you're not supposed to remember anything about your past life, and a lot of these kids are. But in the clairvoyance world, it's funny that you mentioned that, there's like no existence of it, or I was trying to think of what you just said, but I just had
brain fog.
Brain fog. But
Did
anyway,
you just admit literally after 23 podcast episodes that you tuned me out during our podcast?
Well,
is that why you sit there and trail off and you're like, you know what, Pax? Hold on a minute. Let me think about it. Then you're all, wait, what was that?
Purposely tune you out. I was in a thought process of something you said, and I actually kind of forgot how you just worded it. But anyway, that's my fault. So yes, in open air, I just admitted that I had a little brain fog there. But anyway, you were basically saying that it was non-existent, right? And that people are like shroomed away from it. Let me just walk right out of this conversation. It's funny that you say that, because who was Nostradamus?
Oh, he was a major psychic.
It's funny.
Major psychic.
Major psychic clairvoyant, right?
Yep. Because
he could see the future, tell you what the future beholds. Now, did a lot of his stuff come about? Did any of it come true? Maybe some of it, they said.
Oh, a lot of it came true, but also a lot of it didn't come true. So it's open to interpretation.
Right. So he had the sixth sense, but nobody walks away from that conversation when you talk about Nostradamus. So why would you walk away from a conversation of a person that is legitimately clairvoyant or psychic? I mean, I don't want to get into psychic mediums, but why it's funny how people, if it's not something in history, if it's not something that was written and said, oh, this person, by all accounts, was a clairvoyant, he had the sixth sense, but you let somebody walk up to you and say, I'm partial clairvoyance, or I am clairvoyant and I have the sixth sense, and I can predict a lot of things. Some of them are wrong, but a lot of things are right. And then you get one person that basically goes, okay, I'm out. Like, I'm just going to ease right out of this conversation. But you stand there and talk about Nostradamus, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's cool. It's just.
Well, I got a reason for that, though. The thing is that it comes down to information in society and what is considered normalized. And by normalized, I mean something that has been put on the board meaning life, that people can either associate to and have a connection with, an understanding with, or an interest with. From my experience, unfortunately, with the many, many, many individuals that I've met, that have many amazing abilities that you just don't normally have one day by waking up. It's not a generalized conversation when you're at your desk, at work, and it's like, "Hey, what'd you do this weekend?" "Oh, I went grocery shopping and went to the park and walked the dog. Oh, and I also had a conversation and I saw someone's etherical aura and I had to warn them about a situation. And you know, besides that, I just sage the house, nothing much." Meanwhile, that other person that sits next to you, next to their desk is like, okay, you know? And that's why I was saying this type of conversation is not something that is normal. Now, when you brought up Notre Dame, that is a major individual through history who was in occultism, doing spiritualism. And let me rephrase that, spiritualism, not occultism, but spiritualism of things of the spiritual sense. And then with him being a psychic and everything that came with that, that's how he put himself on the board. And then throughout history, people identified with that. They understood that because there's only in history so many major psychics, so many major individuals that could say, hey, here's how it is. So to have the average person just put out there, oh, hey, I'm clairvoyant, it's not going to be something people can identify with because they just simply don't understand. And that's a perfectly normal reaction, though. That's normal for anybody, I think it's going to be 50-50. I think half people are going to have an interest and want to know more, and the other half are going to be like, I can't process it. It doesn't work with my brain, doesn't compute. So I'm just going to let it be.
Well, the thing is, a lot of people that are clairvoyant ain't going to just come out and say they're clairvoyant.
No.
It's
But that's exactly what I'm getting at, though. It's the status quo of society. Could you imagine if everybody had an ability in life, clairvoyance, ESP, precog, you name it, seeing auras, just whatever. And you were considered the odd person out if you were just a normal human being with no ability, then it would be reverse. Nobody would say, yeah, I didn't do anything today. I didn't help a family, or I didn't go this place and had this interaction or that, and that's society at its worst, unfortunately.
Well, we can go back throughout history where there's been numerous places and times in which people have claimed themselves or others to be clairvoyant. In several religions, stories of certain individuals being able to see things far removed from their immediate sensory perception or commonplace, especially within pagan religions, were oracles. And then they had their own prophecies, which involved some degree of clairvoyance. But then you had, here we go with Christianity again. A number of Christian saints were said to be able to see or know things that were far removed from their immediate sensory perception as a kind of gift from God. And they name a bunch of people. And in the Gospels, it's also recorded as able to know things far removed, again, from their human perception. Some Christians today also share the same claim.
So
now there's so many.
Let me say this real quick. With you saying that right there, being able to perceive information from God or a different place, if you think about what I said in the first part of the podcast segment about having a consciousness and receiving information from a higher level, from an alternate place, to be conscious of something, this ties in exactly with what I was saying, with what you just said.
Well, yeah, I can see that. I mean, does it actually come? I mean, see, here we go again. We're having to mix religion and paranormal, which I've always said that a lot of the Bibles are written. They mention a lot of paranormal stuff, and they also talk about the astral projection, et cetera, et cetera. So here we're doing that. But in Jainism, 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 clairvoyance is regarded as one of the 5 kinds of knowledge. The beings of hell and heaven, which they call devas, are said to possess clairvoyance by birth. Now, according to Jain, which is I guess which is the Jainism is written after Jain text. I'm not going to try to pronounce that word. This kind of knowledge has been called avadhi or something, as it ascertains matter in downward range of known objects within their limits or whatnot. So they're saying that. So here you have Christianity talking about a gift from God. You got Jainism talking about the beings of hell and heaven together are called devas, not divas like, like a diva, like a woman, but devas or devas, Devas. They're saying that these people possess clairvoyance at birth. Now there's a bunch of them. You got anthroposophy. You got Rudolf Steiner. He's famous as a clairvoyant himself, claimed that it's easy for a clairvoyant to confuse their own emotional and spiritual being with the objective spiritual world. I don't know if he's trying to contradict it or what, but the earliest record of clairvoyance is basically it's credited to Marquis de something. I guess he's French. He's a follower of Franz Mesmer. I think you mentioned Mesmer one time. In 1784, was treating a local dull-witted peasant named Victor Ross or Victor Race. During treatment, Race reported that he went into a trance and underwent a personality change, becoming fluent and articulate, and giving diagnosis and prescription for his own disease as well as those of others. Clairvoyance was a reported ability of some mediums during the spiritual period. Now here's a guy in 1784 that they recorded, this Victor Race, that he went under like a personality change, and all of a sudden he became fluent and articulate and basically given his own diagnosis and prescription to the doctor that was trying to basically help him, I guess, for his own disease. So,
see, but grabbing that information from a higher level, a higher consciousness place, a higher level of energy, a different realm, I mean, there's many ways to refer to it as. So tell me this. All right, we got the consciousness potentially transcending, changing when you pass away, and you have individuals that are clairvoyant. Do you think that the information that a consciousness gets from a higher level is the same level or the same place that somebody that's clairvoyant maybe perceives or gets information to? Or do you think it's something different completely?
well, I think it's something different, man. So we all have abilities, and we only use like a very, very, very small percentage of our brain.
Yeah, that is a known fact, and they were able to figure that out by testing. If I remember correctly, they're able to figure that out by testing the stimuli of the electrical impulses around the brain and to see how much of the brain was active compared to how much was not. And it's very, very, very negligible. I mean, it's small with how much of the brain that we actually use.
Right. So here's one thing that we never, maybe we haven't stumbled across it yet, but one thing that we never really see is when you talk about, they do studies. I mean, they're doing studies of people that are supposed to be clairvoyant or psychic or medium. I mean, they talk about, there was a development in clairvoyance research when J.B. Ryan, we talked about J.B. Ryan, a parapsychologist. You actually brought J.B. Ryan up in one of our podcasts from the University of Duke or whatever, Duke University. And he introduced the standard methodology with a standard statistical approach to analyzing data as part of his research in extrasensory perception. But the one thing you never hear these guys talk about, I'll go back to that but I just had to read that to let people know that these people were doing research about it. But the one thing they never tell you is how much of the brain is being used while they're while they're transcended into their clairvoyant form, or how much when they're normal, like just me and you sitting around and you take a brain scan, how much brain are they using to get that? That's information. I mean, I'm sure if I dig deep, you might find a little something about it, but I don't think they want to let you know that because, like I said, a normal human being only uses a very, very small portion of our brain.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would think that these people that even have ESP or their conjugative or anything like that, they're using way more of the brain, and one thing that I noticed about all this research, they don't mention none of that.
No.
How much of the brain are these people actually using?
No. They're not going to put out the baseline information like that because I would just honestly think they don't want people to know. You know, you
Right.
have good.
Go ahead.
I was going to say
Go ahead.
they have the white papers of research, which is a technical term for putting it out there report wise on their findings. And I wouldn't be surprised if half the time the direct findings aren't going to be 100% there. When you figure something out anywhere at any level in academia or being a scholar and you publish something, it becomes general consumption, which means everybody can check it out and read it. If someone else is doing a similar study to you and you put out information that's proprietary and then it's no longer proprietary and you put out your information, someone else can take your information, spin it, do something with it, and then it becomes their information if they do something else with it. So a lot of people
Well,
hold their
that's
findings close to the vest unless it's a major breakthrough.
well, and that's what's happened, man. I mean, I'm gonna say something else here in a second, but to answer your question, but that now that you're mentioning that, I mean, look at UFOs. You had what, the blue book written about UFOs, and then they had another book that I mentioned in our podcast about the one that denies the UFOs. Well, here you had J.B. Ryan, a parapsychologist that was studying this extra sensory perception, and a number of psychology departments which would happen is attempted and failed to repeat Ryan's experiments at Princeton University. So now you're coming back to W.S. Cox, who we mentioned in a previous podcast, in 1936, produced 25,064 trials with 132 subjects in a playing card ESP experiment.
Yep.
And he concluded that there is no evidence of extrasensory perception either in the average man or in the group or of the group investigated or in any particular individual of the group.
With
The
that,
discrepancy.
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say
Well, he said,
with that particular study, and I'm actually familiar with that study specifically. With that study, they couldn't quantify the data because they were not able to show patterns or statistical definitives to be able to say more times than not this happened. So this is indeed genuine and real, that clairvoyancy or ESP is provable. And because in science, everything is on probability and ratios and logic, it didn't meet a certain threshold of saying this happened this many times. They were able to say this whole procedure and process was invalidated, meaning it wasn't successful. And there is no specific way or baseline for somebody to be clairvoyant under those controlled test measures.
right. And if we remember right, we talked about this, and I said, well, they were like bringing in random people that were basically claiming to be clairvoyant or whatever, and it wasn't happening. So I mentioned in that podcast, you need to have a true clairvoyant psychic medium come in there and do the test, and I don't think they were doing that. So of course, those tests were not coming out the way that Ryan was doing it.
No.
So, it's the extrasensory perception. Not only like they brought in one person and she failed when she tried to do it. She failed equally when four other carefully trained experiments took the place. She pretty much failed. So first of all, I want to answer your question. I mean, I know I just went out in a left field, came back and, hit another home run. But anyway, so I don't think I think that, we talk about the paranormal field. So you have certain abilities that you're able to do. I have certain abilities that I do when I'm investigating, right? You agree to that?
Let's say that's a fair statement.
Okay. So I don't think I don't know. I can't say, I'm not religious. So I'm not going to say it's a gift from God. Is astral projection a gift from God? Like I said before in a previous podcast, I was told by someone in the religious field that if you astral project, like you weren't trained to do it, you just were born to do it. That you're the right hand of God and you help heal people. Like he can pull your astral form out along with others and gather you in a hospital around. And I talked about, you remember, the one kid laying there could barely move. And then the next morning, the kid's sitting there eating breakfast, talking about, what's up? Let's play some soccer or something. You know what I mean? And it's a miracle. Like everybody's there going, what just happened?
Yep.
Okay. I just think that, these people that claim to be clairvoyant or psychic or mediums, they were born with a little bit more of a brain activity. So I'm going to go a little scientific and a little paranormal. I think that, and it usually, now let me say this, usually if you research that stuff, they have somebody in their family down the tree that was a clairvoyant or a psychic, and that ability went through the DNA channel and just hit that person. So now you're 3 generations forward, and the daughter of a couple is clairvoyant. She doesn't understand it. Let's say starting out young, she's seeing things or things are happening she don't understand. That was an ability given to her from a past relative, right? Can you agree to that?
I do. I concur.
So, okay, so I'm just saying, like, these people, some of these people were born with it, the ability to do what they do. I was somewhat. I've been dealing since birth. I've been dealing with the paranormal and the ability to hear things, and I never could understand it. So I'm going to just go along those lines. That it's not a. I don't know if it's a gift from God, but they were definitely born with some kind of ability. And as far as those, now I'm not saying myself. As far as those people concerned, they have a little bit more brain activity than most of us, and they're able to use that sixth sense, if that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. I mean, to water it down, it just comes down to the haves and have-nots. You have people that can't do anything, and you have people that have abilities that can do miraculous and amazing things, depending on perspective. And at the end of the day, if somebody is clairvoyant, whatever they choose to do with that is their own personal opinion and right, and no one else's. Rather they help people, rather they keep it to themselves, rather they turn a blind eye and just try to ignore it their whole life. Everybody's different. Everybody finds whatever their purpose is in life. Now, rather it's, coming into the fold of having an ability and wanting to make it beneficial, that's up to them. But to be humble and to be honest and open, the majority of people that I've met that have some sort of ability, A, never tell anybody. Not out of fear of persecution, but because it's not a normal thing in today's society to say, hey, by the way. So I noticed that, which I completely understand. Two, and it just kind of goes with how it is, everybody are just down to earth people that want the better of things. If I had to kind of paint it with a broad stroke of a brush, they were individuals that just wanted the better in things, which I found kind of unique and interesting because it's not to say a typical personality type or mindset, but it is. And the other thing that I saw is everybody, for the most part, at one point in time of their life, they hit a struggle point. They hit a struggle point to where they were trying to make do with where they were in life. And understand what was going on with their abilities, and to make it work with their life. Because if anything, me and Dalton definitely can say from our own personal opinions, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes having an ability is not peach cobbler. It's not simple. It's not easy, depending upon what you're presented with or what you experience. And it's just one of those things that at the end of the day, I like to think more times than not that if anybody is able to do something that most people aren't able to, that they try to help humanity. So with
Well, and you go when you go to, you talk about clairvoyance. So real quick, I know we're trying to do another one. We got one more segment we got to do. That's a 1 hour show. But when you talk about clairvoyance, what's your quick response on remote viewing?
well, remote viewing, I do believe in. Remote viewing, for anybody that's never heard of it before, is the ability to be an individual that has the ability to want to know what is going on in a different place than where you're located at presently. So let's say, for instance, you're at your house, you have the ability of remote viewing, and you want to know how your mother or father's doing. Okay, just for analogy's sake, or a loved one or a friend, it could be anybody, and they're not doing well in health. And you just had a gut instinct like something's up. Well, remote viewing is being able to, for all purposes, go to where they are, get a snapshot of what's going on, and then it come back to you. Okay? So, in metaphysical principles, it's you literally thrusting a part of your consciousness in your astral body over to where they are, get a quick glimpse, and then have it return. And you get an impression of, okay, here's what's up. On layman's terms, imagine if somebody sent you a photo of what was going on with that loved one and sent it back to you so you could physically see the state of what's happening in that environment. Same thing. One's metaphysical, one is via technology. I think remote viewing, I think it happens from a lot of experiences and stories and different things that I've been privy to over my life.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because it's also known as remote sensing, remote perception. I'm going to butcher this, but it's telethesia, which I guess is like, I usually get them mixed up, telekinesis and whatever. But anyway, they also call it traveling clairvoyance.
Yeah.
So basically, is the alleged paranormal ability to perceive a remote or hidden target without support of the senses. Now, just real quick, Stanford Research Institute in the 70s through the mid-90s, they initiated a series of human subject studies to determine whether participants, the viewers of the percipitants, could do a reliable identity on accurate described features of remote locations and targets, hence what you were saying. So they were basically the sender, a human sender was first typically present at the remote location as part of the experiment protocol. A 3-step process was used. First, target conditions to be experienced by the senders were randomly selected. Second, in the viewing step, participants were asked to verbally express or sketch their impressions of the remote scene. And third, these descriptions were matched by separate judges as closely as possible with the intended target. So basically, to see if these people could actually do it, they had them do their remote viewing, sketch it on a piece of paper, and then were judged if it was actually correct.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on and on. And of course, they say remote viewing experiments at the Stanford Research in a series of 35 studies, they could not do so. So they investigated the original experiment's procedure, that the notes given to the judges, and basically there was a guy named Harold E. Putoff and Russell Targ, and they initiated the human subject studies. So the judges in Targ and Putoff's experiments contain clues as to which order that they carried out, such as referring to yesterday's 2 targets or the date of the session at the top of the page, et cetera, et cetera. Remote viewing is pretty interesting too. And I feel like if anybody wants to take the time to, research some of that if they've never heard of it, I just wanted to touch base on that before we close out.
So I'll say something really quick, and you bringing up remote viewing just reminded me of this story. Years ago, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, maybe, I was watching a TV show, and it was about a little girl. I want to say she was maybe 12, 11, lived in Europe in a country that wasn't well to do off. And everybody in her village and the surrounding villages would bring everybody that was sick to her. And she could look at them, put her hands on them, and automatically get a image in her mind of what was wrong. So she was straight up telling people, hey, this is what's wrong with you. This is why you're sick. Here's what's going on. Well, it made such fanfare and made such a fuss that she got flown to a university with a bunch of scientists and doctors. And they put her in a controlled environment and said, here are so many people that are going to be before you. And the test is simple. We have a bunch of cue cards with ailments that are wrong, and ailments meaning a sickness. And we just want you to put the cue card in front of whichever person you think it belongs to, and that's it. And I think it was like 16 cue cards. And so she did the experiment once and she failed it. So she did it again and she failed it again. And after the first time, it was noticeable that she was stressed out. She was scared. This big environment, modern doctors and all this when she came from a small village. And my point being is that she was being put under the microscope and put in front of everybody to literally do it on demand. A lot of people, from my understanding and experience that I've spoken with, because when I meet someone that has abilities, I'll ask questions, I'll learn, I'll understand from my own understanding. It's a thing that it has to normally be natural, it has to be organic. It just has to happen. Sometimes when it's rushed, it's done on demand, things get muddy. Things don't turn out the way they're supposed to, or it just doesn't work at all. And the reason why I bring up that little girl doing this is because I think out of 16 cue cards, she got 9 of them right out of 16. The number's probably off. So anybody can research this and find exactly what I'm talking about. It's there. But my point is that she still got a whole bunch right, but it wasn't enough statistically for the doctors and the scientists to be happy, for them to say, yes, you are indeed gifted. And in my opinion, in my viewpoint, it's not about numbers and about quantifying and justifying and telling somebody, yes, you were gifted and we confirm it. Because at the end of the day, there's millions upon millions of people out there that are gifted, and there's nobody giving anybody a gold star or a thumbs up or a check on a piece of paper saying you're legit, you're real. These are just every average day people that have abilities that can do miraculous, wonderful things, and they go unnoticed.
Well, and that's what I always say too. Did you put her in the same atmosphere that she's used to? Is she touching the people? Is she grabbing their hands?
No, she didn't. No,
what
no,
is she doing?
no. All the conditions were changed. Before, she did it when she was at her home and people would come to her. She was in her own environment.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying.
And then
that's what I'm saying, and that's what I'm saying. Though, is did she, like, when they came to her house at that time? Did she grab their hand, or did she put her hand on it? Did she touch them in some kind of way?
Yeah, she had her.
When they took the science.
Yep, she had her own methodology, and then when they flew her to the big university where the doctors and scientists were, it was sterile. It was very matter of fact of do this with everybody watching and cameras. It wasn't, so it was. kind of like
Yeah,
a
so
culture
it's
shock.
right. So you're standing up, let's say 16 people in front of her. You're not letting her do her thing.
No.
And that's what I say about all these tests. You're not putting them in their the right environment. You're not letting them do what they do to do what they do. And you don't want them, to me, the scientists don't want them to do it because then it proves them wrong in a certain way about science and that these people do have abilities and they can do it. So you're going to put her in front of 16 people. You're not going to let her walk by them. You're not going to let her touch them. You're just going to say, take these cards and put them down in front of each person, telling them what's wrong. Now, for her to get 9 out of 16 right without even doing what she normally does, I would be sold.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Well, I remember watching it, and I was heartbroken for her because I'm like, this child, for most part, this young teenager, not even a teen, just becoming a teen, went through all of this, you know? And so the reason why I bring all that up is there's people out there that have abilities that you'll never know. It could be your neighbor. It could be your teacher in school. It could be a friend. It could be someone you're related to. And unless a conversation happens, something happens to make that conversation happen, you'll just never know. And to me, that's
No,
sad. That's sad, unfortunately, because
you
that's
could walk by somebody that has that ability and they could touch you and they so want to say something, but they don't. They just keep
yep,
going.
yep. And it all depends on what their ability is. So, but
Mhm.
as far as it goes, that wraps up our season 2 podcast episode 11, Transcending Consciousness If You Pass Away, and Clairvoyance.
And I'd
So,
like to thank Paige for the consciousness part. Thank you for feeding us that on a question that you wanted to know about the paranormal. Paige, thank you very much. I hope that that we did on consciousness would answer the question you're looking, give you the answers you're looking for.
yep. And I know we talked a lot about clairvoyance, went into that a little bit. I mean, that's a psychic ability. There's a lot more we could unpackage, but that's just one ability of a plethora of tons of abilities that are out there that people use and do. So be sure to check us out. We're also on YouTube now, youtube.com, Theory Paranormal, or YouTube Music also now. So that is all we have for this episode. So as we say, if you have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, please feel free to email us at info@theoryparanormal.com and we will get back to you. Anything about the podcast, any evidence you want to submit for our review, and we will message you and tell you our professional opinion. And lastly, as we say, don't be afraid to ask questions.